What about President Powell? Very different kind of leadership style than
Yes,
Dr. Martin.
It was. Going back to descriptions, and I can't take credit for this either, but I heard a member of Eastern's faculty comment some years after J.C. retired that he always viewed J.C. as a tragic hero. And I thought that was such a perfect description of J.C. because he was president during a time of dire budget constraints. Mm-hmm. And this campus functioned, and I think as an example of that, when Dr. Funberg became president, we had a nice balance. We were not in dire straits when he took over the presidency. And I attribute that a great deal to J.C.'s leadership. J.C. was really a fiscal mastermind. And I'm sure that's why Dr. Martin brought him to Eastern's campus with him when he came from Frankfurt, when he served as president.
And J.C. also came out of state government.
Kentucky Department of Education, as I recall.
And so worked with Bob when he was superintendent.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Martin recognized his fiscal expertise, and he was masterful, I think, in taking this campus through some very severe budgetary times.
But he was also much less of a quote-unquote dictator than...
And again, I'm going to go back to Dr. Martin. I find that the benevolent dictator, I find that a nice description of Dr. Martin. A lot of folks, of course, would have no way of knowing this, and I didn't know about it until some years later. But there were families in Richmond at Christmas time who would have had no Christmas if it hadn't been for Dr. Martin. And I know of things that he did on campus to help faculty and staff that they had no awareness of. He did not want any recognition for that.
Can you think of what kinds of things he did? Not the names of the people, but...
Well, yes. One thing in particular, he was, I thought, a very tender-hearted person. And I mentioned a moment ago that Barbara Adams' son was injured when she was working in that office, and that was Greg, as you know, and our tennis facility here on campus is named for Greg. And Greg was playing football here in Madison County School System and was injured. And Dr. Martin was just devastated by that. And at that time, the budget was done in the president's office, and all of it, the contracts, every aspect of the budget was done actually in J.C.'s office. But Polly Gorman and Barbara and J.C., and at the time Earl Baldwin and later Jim Clark, and Dr. Martin and I would work during spring break, and that's when we would put the budget together. Well, we had worked that spring break, and Greg was injured. And later, Dr. Martin called me into his office, and someone, and he never said who the person was, had told him that Barbara had intended to take off during spring break and go somewhere with Greg, but she couldn't because she had to work. And that caused him great angst because he thought that he had taken her away from going somewhere with Greg because he had wanted her to work. And he was very disturbed that he thought that had occurred. I don't know that ever was the case, that Barbara and Greg, perhaps it was, I never knew. But I think few people realize the impact that had on him.
What else can you tell us about Dr. Powell?
Well, we were talking a moment ago about the dire budget situation, which, what goes around comes around. Here we are again. But anyway, at that time, of course, we had no email. So you did everything by telephone, which in many ways is very beneficial. And J.C. was on vacation at the time. And I'm not sure I'm going to remember all the particulars about this, but as I recall, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, I believe John Y. was governor. And I had called one of the other president's office, and I won't say which one it was. When JC became president, I'm going to back up here a little bit, he thought that all the presidents should get together as a group and go to Frankfurt instead of each president going individually and presenting his or her case. And it was called at that time the Council of Presidents. I'm not sure if that's still what it's called. Perhaps you know that, but I'm not quite sure. I don't even know if it still functions. But anyway, he was the first chair of the Council of Presidents. And so I called another president's office, and as we always do, we chit-chatted about what's your boss doing today and so forth. And so I asked that question, and she said, well, he's in Frankfurt today. And I said, oh. And she said, yes, he's meeting with the governor about our budget.
Oh.
So we wouldn't have known that if I hadn't made that phone call. But at John Y., I think I'm correct that he was the governor. It's dangerous when you recollect when it could be another governor, but anyway, he called a meeting, and I knew that Dr. Powell should be there because he was chair of the Council of Presidents. So he was going to Texas on vacation. JC and Downey were, and I knew I needed to get in touch with him. Well, he didn't have a cell phone, certainly not a BlackBerry or laptop or anything, so he usually stayed at that time at a Holiday Inn. So I called the local Holiday Inn, and I got the atlas out, and I thought I knew the route that he might take. I had no idea. So I called this Holiday Inn, and I said, could you track him and see if you could find him booked at a Holiday Inn? So they did.
Wow.
They found him. And so I left a message at the Holiday Inn where he was staying and asked him to call me. So he called me back, and I told him about the meeting, and he flew back for that meeting. So when he came back to the office, as he passed my desk going into his office, he looked at me and he said, you're in the wrong business. You should work for the CIA.
So you found him in Texas?
I found him in Texas, and he flew back for that meeting. And so I told him about the president whose office I had called, and I had found out that that president had indeed gone outside their agreement to go to Frankfurt and tried to make his case over and above what JC was going to do for the Council of Presidents.